please welcome to the stage the writer and director of the film, Stephen Merchant. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Just FYI to everyone here, Stephen Merchant fans know him as the creator of The Office.
That's right.
Yes. The
Yeah.
creator of The Office.
Yeah.
And Extras. And I'm sorry, I know I've asked you this before, but I have to ask again. I wouldn't have associated a wrestling picture in you.
Right. I don't know what that. It feels like an insult, and I don't know
I know,
why.
it's
something
I'm
to do with my
trying,
physique, isn't it?
No, I'm not trying not to be insulting. It just
No, I didn't know anything about wrestling, and it was not something I grew up watching. And I was presented this opportunity by my dear friend Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We made a movie together in 2010 called Tooth Fairy. You're welcome. And and we stayed in touch over the years. And he was in England. He was filming Fast and Furious 6. And he was unable one night to sleep. He was in a hotel room. I assume the presidential suite of the the Best Western, and he's got the free robe on, that's barely fits The Rock, barely covers his Dwayne Johnson, and I don't know if that's what he calls it. He might do. Maybe he calls it The Rock. Who knows? But he saw this documentary on British TV about this family, this real family. You saw a few clips at the end, and he just fell in love with them. And he completely related to their story, coming from a wrestling family.
Did he know about Paige though?
He didn't know that was his first sort of exposure to her, and then became involved with her life as we dramatise in the film, including that moment where he tells her that she's going to go on for the big night. And somewhere along the line, I think realised that there was a sort of movie idea sort of at the core of it, that was sort of sitting there really like a Rocky-style story, and wanted someone, I think, with a British sensibility to write the script. I'm fairly sure he's only got 2 British people in his phone. It's me and Jason Statham. And Statham's more the guy he goes to when he needs someone he can pretend to beat up.
Plus, he was busy.
But exactly, Statham's busy. I had nothing going on. You're right. And so he sent me the documentary, and I kind of thought, I'm not going to be interested in this. And like him, I just was so completely won over by the family and by the story and by particularly the relationship between the brother and sister. And to me, it's not really about wrestling in the same way I keep thinking of films like Billy Elliot that aren't really about a boy. It's not really about ballet, right? It's just about a boy who has a dream that happens to be ballet.
Well, I mean, I think that's also, it could be said to be a signature, I think, of a lot of your comedy, is that it's really about something else.
Right.
It's
The Office is not really about paper.
Strange though it is.
Yeah.
Although this movie did give you the opportunity to direct some wrestling.
Yes, that's true.
That must have been fun.
Well, it was not fun, because it's very stressful, because you are constantly terrified someone's going to get injured. Florence did an awful lot of the wrestling herself.
Florence is about to become a huge star. She's the one who plays Paige. Tell us about working with her.
Well, she's incredible. I mean, I saw maybe 60 different people for this part, and it was a very, very hard role to cast because, as you can imagine, there's the physicality, there's the humor, there's just the acting chops to carry the movie, and you need someone who's got the charisma that you'd believe she could become a WWE superstar. If there's one thing the real Paige has, it's bags of charisma. And Florence came in, and it wasn't an obvious fit straight off the bat, and she worked on the voice, and she worked on the movement, and worked with Jack, who plays her brother, and in the end, very much my casting director who kept pushing me. She said, "I think this is the girl," and we took that roll of the dice, and you never quite know until you're there in the thick of things if you've made the right choice. But boy, my God, we did, and
really did.
She's just, I mean, she was 19, I think, when she walked out to shoot that scene at the end, which was filmed at a real Staples Center wrestling event, and I was an absolute bag of nerves, but she just was stone cold, just walked out, just did her job. And she said at one point, she said she felt like a wrestler because she was lying on the mat after one take, and she just looked across and she saw an 8-year-old boy just screaming, "You suck!" And it's like, the real Paige was like, yeah, that's wrestling.
It's I love the way that the movie has this. We were just talking about this, but it has this kind of dip in it, and it gets very serious, in a matter of like what is my purpose in life if it can't be wrestling, and what Jack is going through. And I wonder if there isn't maybe a larger point in that about comedy in general. I mean, have there been times in your career where you feel like you've been contemplative or had to make a pivot like that?
I think it's more, luckily for me, it's more of that sort of there but for the grace of God go I, right? I mean, I think there's many occasions where, you could have made the wrong choice or someone didn't choose you, and then what do you do? I mean, like him, I was very passionate about doing comedy and sitcom and film from a young age, and had that not worked out, I don't quite know what I'd be doing. And I think that was the thing that so struck me, because there are many films about people of exceptional ability, particularly in the sports genre, and that's funny because it's great to celebrate that success. But there are an awful lot of people that get left behind that don't make it, and that's what struck me as perhaps an interesting dimension to this: is what do you do when it doesn't work out for you? It doesn't mean your life's over. He was very young. It doesn't mean you're not of value, and how do you pick up the pieces and sort of reevaluate? And perhaps even more importantly, as Paige says in the movie, it's just because a million people aren't cheering your name, it doesn't mean what you do isn't of value. And I think we do live in an age sometimes where celebrity and Instagram likes and all those things, particularly for younger people, seem like the be-all and end-all. And actually, it's valuable to remember that that's not the case.
It's not the case. You find meaning elsewhere.
Right.
I know you come out of stand-up and also television, episodic work. This has a feature shape to it. I wonder if you have a preference, if there's stories have, I guess, maybe do they suggest a duration, how long they should be, or did this always seem like it would be a feature?
When I went to meet the family and when I went to meet Paige, the thing which the documentary didn't cover, the documentary only really takes you as far as when she first goes to America. And when she told me that she won the title on her first ever appearance on the main roster, I just thought, well, there's the ending, right? You can't write that stuff. It's crazy. And so it just seemed like it just had that ready built-in movie structure. And I think also I'd done a lot of episodic TV, and the urge in TV is to never end the story, right? Is to just keep going and finding ways of contriving to keep it afloat. And I think there was something very appealing, both having always wanted to do movies, and also just there's something about being able to conclude the story and take someone on a journey in that 90 minutes that hopefully by the end you get a little emotional, which is something I think it's slightly harder to do in TV.
Absolutely, and I feel like you also extended that opportunity to your actors. I mean, to see Lena Headey, who we normally see in Game of Thrones,
right,
and the idea of extending that over season after season, but really doing a character arc over, and same with Nick as well.
Right,
they really were able to push out. I mean, did you see a lot of actors for those roles, or were you like, it's got to be Nick?
No, I mean, Nick. Well, the real father, Ricky, demanded that Ray Winston play him. I want Ray Winston. All right, Rick, yeah, I'll make a call. Obviously didn't. But you don't argue with him when he's talking. So Nick was, because I just thought that, Nick's clearly got the comedy chops, but I felt like he'd be able to tap into some other reserve of kind of menace, because I think he's quite good at when he's sort of tough as well, and I think you get that sense that he may have had a troubled past in the film.
He can do Teddy Bear too.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. And then Lena had seen the documentary and heard about the project, and she made overtures to us, and I mean, amazingly, even came and auditioned for me, because like anyone who's seen her in Game of Thrones, it seemed like a hard stretch to think of her as this working class Norwich, wrestling mother. But I think she does a great job.
She does an amazing job.
Yeah.
I have to ask you this: the music in the film is incredible too, and we just did another Q&A, and there was an amazing question about the music. Can you tell us about who made your original score and how that process came about?
Well, one of the things my editor and I, struggled a lot with the music as we were cutting the film, because I sort of instinctively knew it shouldn't be kind of grand orchestral music. It didn't seem to be in keeping with the family and their sort of homemade quality. Everything's kind of homemade. The costumes and the ring is gaffer taped together and everything. And so we tried various kinds of music, and the only stuff that seemed to fit for me was this kind of punky British sort of guitar music, from the sort of early 80s. And but it's actually quite hard to find musical scores like that you could use just as temporary score while you're composers working on it. And so, in the end, we just sort of left him, and he put a little super group together, including the drummer from The Cure and Graham Coxon from Blur, and they just kind of sort of semi-jammed, a lot based on Vic the composer's kind of rough ideas. And I kind of was happy to keep the mistakes in and any kind of rough and errors and miscues and string twangs or whatever. I don't know what that. I'm not a musician, and just because I just thought it just seemed so in keeping with the family, But it was a very restrictive palette for them, and I wouldn't let them use piano until the very end. Save the piano for the end, the most emotional of all the instruments. And so there's no strings, and so I think they do a really great job at just sort of underscoring the emotion without perhaps layering it on too heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it gives the film a great organic vibe to it. Do you can you tell us about what it was like showing your film to the family?
Well, you're always a bit nervous showing a film to a family who, the father of which has been in jail 3 times, mainly for violence. You are conscious that your legs could get broken if he's not happy. But he was very pleased once he accepted Nick in the role. He was very happy. The real Zach, as you can imagine, was very emotional, sort of seeing that whole story played out again. But I think finds it a real kind of therapy for him to be constantly reminded of his place in the world. And Paige was similarly emotional. I took it to Florida and I left her in a room watching it at the NXT training facility. I didn't want to sort of sit there and kind of just scrutinize. Do you like that bit? Good, wasn't it? And she just texted me afterwards and she said, "Can you come back in? I don't want to come out and let all the other wrestlers see me crying," which was really sweet. She enjoyed it. Just to be clear, she wasn't like, "Oh, that's a wasted 90 minutes." So they seem very pleased, which is good.
No, I thought it was terrific.
Thank you.
I didn't know what to expect. It reminded me of The Fighter in a way that
Sure.
Because I didn't want to. I'm not into the violence, but the backstory was fascinating. And like
Right.
you said, it's incidental that it happens. It could be about anything.
Could be about anything,
But
absolutely.
the two-part question that came to my mind, I've been to the UK a lot. I just visited someone in Glasgow for a couple months, and this looks so much like her house. Where did you shoot it? And the other part I was going to say is, I see you're from Bristol, England,
Yes.
right? But you have I can hear the Irish in there. I don't know if I'm just curious about where that comes in your life.
Well, firstly, you don't hear Irish because there's absolutely no Irish in my family.
Something in
Although
there.
I guess there's perhaps some kind of Celtic influence in the Bristol accent where I'm from. We can find no evidence in my family of anyone from anywhere other than my hometown of Bristol.
Okay.
I think we may be the most incestuous family that's ever lived in the UK, and that's saying something. There's a program called Who Do You Think You Are, which is like where they research your family, and a newspaper in England does a kind of rip-off version of that. And one day I just happened to read the paper, and someone had done a family study of my family without asking me. And they could find no evidence of anyone of any interest. We were all just factory workers and labourers, all of whom came from Bristol. And my last name's Merchant, so you'd think at least there was a merchant, trader of some description. No one. So it seems like we must have just, like one of my distant relatives just found a merchant trader kind of half beaten to death in the street and just stole his wallet and identity. And that's how we're now called Merchant. So no Irish blood.
Okay.
In terms of, we shot some of it in Norwich, their real hometown, and some of it was in the sort of very outskirts of London.
Okay.
Because, like Glasgow, London, there's lots of and Norwich is kind of the same on the outskirts. They're almost identical, and
Council housing, right?
the council housing,
So
it's
it's just
all
like-
very, very
yeah.
generic with that sort of pebble dash look.
Exactly
And
like where I just came from.
That's
I
it.
thought it was her house.
yes, exactly. We tried to find one that looked very much like their real place.
Stephen,
Yes.
you're someone who writes refreshingly three-dimensional women. I can think of Jessica in Hello Ladies,
Oh, thank you, yeah.
Maggie in Extras, and of course Dawn. My question is, what advice do you have for other male writers so they can do better?
That's extraordinary. Well, I take your compliment very much to heart. That's wonderful. To me, I think it's just sort of, it's like I feel like I'm going to say, here's how you write women. Like I've written 3. You know what I mean? Like I'm not.
But 3 really good.
Thank you, but I think it's just you just write them as human beings. I am dumbstruck when I see poorly written female characters, but I think I'm also kind of shocked when I see just badly written characters, full stop, really. But there were interesting things here which came up in the research. I was saying to Josh before, Paige's version of the story was that she went to Florida and she got bullied. And certainly when I initially was writing the script, you know, the other girls felt a little bit mean girlsy in the more traditional sense. And it's only when I went to Florida and I met some of the real trainers and some of the real women, and they said to me, oh, no, Paige was the bully sometimes. And that really opened things up for me, because it started to make me think about the other women that she worked alongside as not just enemies for her to sort of battle through, which was very much Paige's perspective, but just as other women who, you know, who have their own dreams and pursuits, and you know, and just because they sort of happen to look a certain way, why are we demonizing them, you know? So I think it's just, you know, a good example of just, I think the more you research and the more you delve in and the more you ask questions, and I would call Paige constantly and how were you feeling and what were you thinking, and so hopefully that's the stuff that kind of underpins it.
I mean, it's kind of a film about performing also. When you think
About performing?
Right. I mean, they are all playing a role when they're in the
Right.
ring, and the idea of sustaining that even when you know your family really knows who you are.
Yeah, well, and also I ran into a problem in the writing, because I realized that, of course, because it is a performance, it's not like in Rocky where when he punches Apollo Creed, within the world, he's really punched him and that guy's really gone down. Wrestling is contrived and there's fakery. And so what's the victory at the end if the decision has already been scripted by the WWE? And then Dwayne opened up my eyes, because he was saying, well, the real victory in wrestling is, can you win over the crowd? And if you win the crowd, then you sort of, that's what your career is based on. And that kind of opened it up. And so in a way, it's as much a showbiz Star is Born kind of story as it is a wrestling movie or a sports film.
And very much one that wins over a crowd. I think we have time for one more question.
Has your writing situation at hotels gotten better since you posted that video?
Yes, for people who haven't seen it, I do a lot of writing in hotels if I'm sort of traveling or if I'm acting in something else. And as you can see, I'm very tall, and this is a pretty good chair for me. This is a good height for me. You know, it's perhaps a little high, but it's a good height for me. And I would need a desk around there to be comfortable, which is a very tall desk, and you don't find that in hotels. And so at home, I have a special desk that raises up and down, and so I have to construct quite elaborate writing desks in hotels using found objects that I can find. And so my greatest achievement was when I was writing this. I was making that film Logan, and I was in Natchez, Mississippi, and I combined I had an ironing board with a drawer from a chest of drawers, which I turned upside down, that placed on top of the ironing board. That brought the height. Then I had an iPad on there, which was the screen, and that was wired up to my laptop, which was a keyboard down here. But then these arms weren't supported, so I then got extra cushions from the maid, and I stacked them up either side. So I now had and I sort of built this weird sort of Star Trek style improvised writing.
And then
pod.
they moved to your hotel, right?
Yeah, and exactly, and then we moved on to the next town. Yeah, so it's just the agony I went through to make this film.
You know what? This is a question actually that I'm just now remembering. How much of this is improvised, and how much of it is scripted?
It's mainly scripted, but there's definitely I definitely welcomed improv, and you know, and there's some certainly around the dinner table. There was some improv. That scene in reality went on for, you know, hours. In the you know, it's about sort of 20 minutes long, that scene, and in particular Vince Vaughn improvised, I would say, the lion's share of his lines in that film. He's just so damn good. He's a really extraordinary. He likes to have a script, and then, you know, when you give it to him, and he's very determined. He wants to know the lines, and he wants to know what the script is. You can't just tell him to make something up, but then he'll look at it and then just make something up that's brilliant. He's just remarkable. He's extraordinary.
And having him in attack dog mode is just
It's a joy.
just the way to
Yeah.
Let's thank our guests for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.